Now, Robert Land was the first settler in Hamilton, but at the time it was called the head of the lake. How did he get here? He was a sheriff and a magistrate in Pennsylvania. And down in Pennsylvania, the revolution started with the Americans. He stayed loyal to the British side because he was delivering messages from Pennsylvania up to the Fort Niagara on Lake Ontario, and he knew the route back and forth. He stayed loyal with the British. His neighbors did not like them. They arrested him and they put him in jail, and he was going to be executed for being a traitor to the revolution. There was an jail escape. He's wounded and he goes into the forest. The Americans cannot find his body, so they assume he's dead. They go to his wife Phoebe and says, "Your husband's dead, leave." And she's banished to Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, Phoebe runs into a man and says, "Are you Phoebe Land of the Robert Land that's taking provisions out of the Fort Niagara?" And Phoebe at that point has a leap of faith that her husband is still alive. So she leaves Nova Scotia, comes to the fort, asks where the whereabouts of her dead husband is, and they point her to the head of the lake. She canoes up an inlet that was known as Land Inlet, and the family is reconnected, reunion again, and the lands prosper. And she meets her long dead husband at the head of the lake after 9 years of separation. The family survive, they prosper, and one of the descendants of Robert Land, a woman, goes to Detroit. She marries a dentist. That marriage creates a baby, and that baby is the first person to fly the Atlantic solo, Charles Lindbergh. So if Phoebe did not have that leap of faith in 1790s in Nova Scotia to reconnect with her dead husband, Charles Lindbergh would not have flown the Atlantic. And I'm going to talk about John Moody Jr. He had a very interesting hobby. That hobby was that he wanted to be the very first, on the very first cross-Atlantic maiden voyage of the luxury liners that went back and forth to England. What he did this over 50 times by 50 different luxury liners. And rumor has it that he missed the Titanic. And I wondered why. He was in England at the time the Titanic left, but he wasn't at the ship leaving Southampton for its maiden voyage. He was there at its launch in Belfast. This man was incredibly weird when it came to being that close to ships. Now, why he did not get on the Titanic, I do not know, but he did have a ticket for the launch of the Titanic in Belfast. When the Titanic left Southampton for its maiden voyage, this man was listening to an opera in Germany. Now, Martha became a missionary in 1872, and in 1880 she was sent to Japan to teach the Japanese children there. The society of Japan at the time was very isolation, and they would not allow a male white man to look at their wife or woman or children. So Martha was able to get the job to be a teacher in Japan because she was a female. What this monument is an honor to Martha, and it says she founded the Japanese school in Tokyo. She worked tirelessly to get this school up and running to the point where she lost most of her health. She had to come home to Hamilton, and she set up a home here for missionaries coming back and forth from around the world. She died in March 1945 and never knew the outcome of her school because the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were dropped in August of 1945. She would have been heartbroken if her school was destroyed. This school still exists today, and those students come to Canada to lay flowers on this grave, and this tree here is a sakura tree to honor the woman that gave the vision that all women needed to be educated, and the Japanese clutched onto that to expand their knowledge in the world. This is a pagan image of mourning, and it's in a Christian society. So you had to put in Christian symbols of mourning to make it work for the Christian society. So it's an amalgamation of both pagan art and Christian art, or symbolism. So if you follow down her arm here, and you can see that what happens is that this 3D statue turns into a 2D here and incorporates the palm of Palm Sunday. And right at that point right there, where it goes from 2D to 1D dimension, that is the symbol of death right there. You have transferred into a new dimension. You are no longer alive, you are now past. And it became Christian. There's another Christian symbol in it, and what it is the angel wings. The angel wings come out of the rock, and it is so unique that you can actually see the little pieces of the individual feathers inside the feather. This is a marvelous piece of artwork showing the two concepts of a pagan Christian classic statue with the Christian symbols of resurrection and death. We're standing in front of the mass grave of the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. This whole area here has over 400 Hamiltonians that are buried in a mass grave right here. Actually, the epicenter started in Kansas in the United States. A soldier had it. He went to the front during World War I, and that's where the spread started. And the misnomer there is that the soldiers coming back from the trenches after the war ended are the ones that started the plague. They did not start the pandemic. What it did was it started in the United States and went to Europe. And then all the soldiers in Europe, when they went back to their countries, that's where it spread around the world. So what happened is that these soldiers that actually survived the war in the trenches in Europe got the disease and brought it back and died here in North America. It was a world pandemic. Millions of people died, and we are in the midst of one right now. James Gage has the distinction of owning the farm where the Battle of Stony Creek took place in 1813, June 6, 1813. So people know him as the owner of the farm where the Battle of Stony Creek took place, but what they don't know is that he is the founder of Burlington, Ontario. We're standing in front of the Calder family plot here, and I'm going to be talking about Sarah Calder. Sarah Calder was the hero of the War of 1812. In 1912, she is a Victorian dynamo and a women's hero. So what happened was that she wanted a monument for the Battle of Stony Creek. So she built the monument in Stony Creek. And on June the 6th, 1913, it was unveiled by the Queen of England from Buckingham Palace. She pushed a button there, the spark went under the Atlantic Ocean cable, came up to Stony Creek, and the veil fell, and the monument was unveiled. An IT coup at the time. This is a Victorian hero. This is a woman that never said no and got things done. During all this time, she was in mourning. All her children had died, including her husband. So somehow this woman of strength put all that problems with the family loss and turned it into something positive for the legacy she left for us today in Hamilton. Because he was an electrician, he had a need for speed, and he could implement his training to the fire department. And he put in all sorts of innovations into our Hamilton Fire Department. The iconic brass pole, he brings that to Hamilton for the very first time. There's a hole in the floor where the guys would be on the second floor, and when the fire happened, they could zip through the floor and not need an elevator. They just wrap their arms around the pole and slide all the way down. That was an innovation that he brought, and that was the very first fire pole in Hamilton, and it still exists. I insisted that they keep it, and they did. But there was another problem, and that problem was they still had to open the door, and that took time. So what he did with his electrician, he put in a button again that they could push the button and the doors automatically opened up. He invented the garage door opener right here in Hamilton because he had a need for speed to get to the fire first. And this is an unsolved murder of Ethel Kinrade. The story goes that Ethel and her sister Florence were in the Herkimer house that they lived in, and a tramp came to the door demanding money. Florence went upstairs to get the money, heard the shots, came downstairs, and Ethel was dying on the floor, and the tramp had run away. During the inquest, the story changed radically, and suspicion fell on Florence, the sister, of killing her own sister, Ethel. How that came about was that Florence was a vaudeville actress, and she traveled Canada, North America, the US, and on the road she met a man, and that man was sending love letters back to Herkimer Street, her address, and her sister Ethel intercepted them and was demanding to give them to Florence's fiance, who happened to be a minister here in Hamilton. When Ethel's body was found by the police, they found 6 shots in her body, 2 of them in the heart. That made the suspicion that it was an act of passion. We're standing in front of the Caddy family plot. Who I'm going to talk about is John Caddy, who's over there on the ground. His stone has been broken and it's laying flat now. And his father sent him to the academy in England to follow in his footsteps as an engineer for the British. When he gets there, he shows an excellent talent as an artist. An engineer needed the talent as an artist so that he could produce the maps and the charts and the sketches of the ports, the forts, and where they were stationed around the world. John was sent to St. Lucia, and he starts writing a diary, and he ends up at British Honduras, and British Honduras is Belize today. The Americans show up, and they tell Caddy that they are on a mission, an expedition, to find all the Mayan sites on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Belize is close to the Yucatan, Walker and Caddy put their heads together and say, let's beat the Americans to the lost city of Palenque. They set up their own expedition, go through the jungle, and Caddy writes his whole expedition on paper. They get to Palenque, and Caddy is the very first white man to sketch the images of the Mayan ruins. They find it and discover it first. They stay there for a week, and he does detailed imaging of the lost city of Palenque. What happens is that he's demoted for doing that, and the results of his expedition never gets published, and that's why I thought the Americans found it first. And the reason for that is because he did not ask permission to set up the expedition by the British to do that. So he's demoted, the expedition is squashed, the information is squashed, and he is demoted to a desert island in the Mediterranean called Malta. He's known for his artistry. What he's not known for is being the man who found the lost city of Palenque. GAR is the Grand Army of the Republic. He fought for the blue guys, the North. And 61 to 65 are the dates of the American Civil War, when it started and when it ended. What he did during the Civil War was he met a young boy general named George Armstrong Custer. They became extremely good friends, and William was a crack shot and a great horseman, and he became the bodyguard and the second in command to Custer. He reassigned himself to the Custer 7th Cavalry, and they went out to Montana and the west to put down the Sioux uprising. When they first discovered the bodies, they buried him on the Last Stand Hill. His mother went to Montana, identified the body, and brought him home in a whiskey barrel. And this stone is telling you the history of his life and death, because he died 11 years after the Civil War ended at the Little Bighorn with George Custer. Alfred was the bank manager of the Bank of Montreal, and his daughter is the one down at the bottom here, Isabel, is the one that commissioned an artist to put a mystery and a artifact in the Hamilton Cemetery, and I'm going to reveal it to you. This is the other side of the Walker Monument. Isabel, the daughter, commissioned an artist from Toronto. He was basically an unknown artist at the time. It was Walter Allward on the bottom of this piece of art. It's an interesting piece of art to begin with. It basically has the toga maiden mourning the family loss, but it's something unique, and it's a change from the classic Victorian imagery to an Edwardian area during the 1900s. The details are amazing because this is a metal monument, right down to the fingers and the flowers that she's holding in her hands. You can actually see the veins in the petals of the flower. She's in repose. Lovely piece of art. Walter Allward. He was a sculptor in Toronto. He was commissioned by Isabel, the daughter, to do this, and he went on to become a famous Canadian sculptor. He is the one designed and built Vimy Ridge. This is the prototype of the Spirit of Canada at Vimy Ridge in France. We're standing in front of the Kerr family monument, and this is the family that also included Ben Kerr. the famous rum-runner of Hamilton. He was ostracized by the family. He was a plumber here in Hamilton, and his plumbing days, what he did was he put all the toilets in the Royal Connaught Hotel. He was also a piano man, and he did all sorts of piano musics in all the speakeasies, and that's when he got involved in rum running. Port of entry was in Belleville, and he had the fastest boat on the lake, and he could outrun all the police. Suspicion, when his body was found, suspicion fell on Rocco Perry as the murderer. There was no evidence that Rocco had hijacked his shipment and killed him. But he was against Rocco Perry's distribution. So the idea that Rocco eliminated his competition. Henry Gough dies in 1880 in a horrific derailment of a railway, and he was squashed between the flat car and the boiler of the train, so it was very horrific. He worked for the railway, and in his short lifetime he dedicated his life to working for the rest of his life on that railway. And his mother, knowing that dedication of her son, put the train on his tombstone. Now, she's put this bas relief train on one side. She's now said her goodbyes to her dead son, but she goes one step further, and she puts an entire poem on the backside of the stone, telling about the death of her son.
My engine now is cold and still, no water does my boiler fill. My coal affords its flame no more, my days of usefulness are o'er. My wheels deny their noted speed, no more my guiding hand they need. My whistle too has lost its tone, its shrill and thrilling sounds are gone. My valves are now thrown open wide, my flanges all refuse to glide. My clacks also, though once so strong, refuse to aid the busy throng. No more I feel its surging breath, my steam is now condensed in death. Life's railway o'er each station past, in death I'm stopped and rest at last. Farewell, all dear friends, and cease to weep. In Christ I'm safe, in Him I sleep.
Hugh Baker Jr. had a hobby where he loved to play chess. He would go out at night with his buddies, smoke cigars and play chess and have brandy or whatever. His wife did not believe him and said, "You can't go out and with your cronies because I don't believe you're playing chess." So he ran into a fellow named Mr. Black, and Mr. Black was the head of the Montreal Telegraph Company. And Black said, "I could run wires from your home to the homes of your friends, and you could tap out your message by Morse code to your friends for your moves and chess moves." And he said, "That's a great idea." So they set up the telegraph poles and the wires, and he started playing chess at home because he compromised with his wife, and he was playing chess with his buddies by the lines. Then he met Black again, and Black was now the IT guy for Mr. Bell in Brantford. And Bell had just invented something called the telephone. And what he did then was Black told Baker that you could transmit the telephone on the same telegraph wires. So Baker said, "That's a great idea, so I could talk to my friends in the other houses." So they set up the very first telephone lines, and they played chess. So he set up the very first telephone exchange in Hamilton, and it was the very first in the British Empire. and called it the Bell Telephone Company. What happens then is that we are now slaves to the Bell telephone and our cell phones because of what this man did back at the turn of the century, because he couldn't go out to play chess with his buddies.